Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and welcome to a short form book review of a couple of the different books that I have been reading, have read. Hopefully, we'll get to another one of these soon. My reading has been a little bit neglected, but I do have books that I really want to and need to get to, including Bringer of Light, Saint Gregory, Llama with a Gun, and A Cold Dish, and Poison City. Those are like all in my immediate. And also I have to finish reading freaking Might Makes Right so that I can do that video. I've just been neglecting. So hopefully this week I can say that I've been a little bit better on getting back on the reading train. You may also notice, I have to mention it because he has been absent for a while since I've had nowhere to put him but in my room. But now he is here! Val is here just in time for the release of Bodymore 3, which came out on Tuesday. Hope you check out all three. It is a complete story that I'm pretty proud of, I think. I should theoretically also be working on the audiobooks for that and book 2. And hopefully I will have some updates for you on book 0. It is an on-off process. That is for sure. An on-off process of feeling good. Anyway, that's not why we're here. Today, we are here to talk about a couple of different books that I read, and hopefully, maybe if any of them interest you and you haven't read them, you will go and check them out. Now, this is going to be different than my normal book reviews where I go beat by beat through everything that I read, and instead, I'm going to kind of give a summary of what the book is about and the major notes that I could think of for the vibe or criticisms that I had for a book. I'll also give a genre, and I will attempt to suggest the book for certain people if I think that there are recommendations, people that can meet those recommendations. Either way, this is a way for me to share more of what I'm reading and not dig holes as deep. I will still do long form, especially if people have recommendations of books they would like to see me do a long form book review on, but I did want to clip them a little bit. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lamoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story or a fragment using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we read those together and bask in the community. This Monday's is going to be so fun because it has to do with one member of the Mistakes and her mango tree and her attempt to defend the mango tree while everybody else came up with stories on how to rob the mango tree. So I am so excited. If you hang out, you may inspire the prompt for the Lamoy because they just kind of come up and I go, ooh, that sounds like a good idea. And then we do it and it's a lot of fun. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover, they will be read here on the channel at a random interval, and that'll hopefully help more readers find your work because everybody just has the hardest time standing out in the sea of items. So once people start talking, that is where the juice is at. The third thing is if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite retailers or places to get books, including the library or OneDrive. All you got to do is request it and should be there. And like I said, Bodymore 3 just came out on Tuesday, and Bodymore 0 will be coming out next year, hopefully, theoretically. And that will be connected to Monty's universe in the Numina Star universe. So if you can't get enough, also just because her story is going to be so good. But there's all of that. Go and check them out, prepare yourself, and enjoy. Enjoy for the spooky. I should probably do better to release stuff for the spooky season on time, but this is where we are. With that said, let's jump into the book reviews. The first one that I'm going to talk about today is Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. We read this book on the Loin stream. Y'all chose it. One of you submitted it. I don't know who submitted this, but we read it in the Loin stream, and it is YA or paranormal. It's theoretically got ghosts, but I feel like the cake quest got more airtime than the ghosts did. So the summary of this book is that a girl who sees ghosts and is really rude gets guilted by her grandmother into doing free work to help a random ghost find her son, since grandma knows that Ropa is, quote, a kind girl with a good heart, despite how everything that we're introduced to Ropa is she's frugal and she's kind of greedy and she's like, I don't work for free, ho. So this sets up for a long book of subquests and flashbacks with the grandparents and rants about podcasts and pyromancy physics, and we have a whole chapter that is literally just the physics of pyromancy. And the Milkman. You also get the Milkman. And it goes through so many side quests and information that have literally nothing to do with the missing boy. And then you eventually find the missing boy at the end and the mystery behind all of that, but also the Milkman. You got more Milkman than Library of the Dead in this. By the way, yeah, that is a major misnomer. So number one, the story is set in Scotland, but there is literally nothing Scottish about it. The only time Scottish people are actually really mentioned is as criminals or as the assholes. But it's not really Scottish. It doesn't do anything to really make the setting Scottish. It mentions like one statue, and it's a Abraham Lincoln statue when they're going through the graveyard. The Library of the Dead comes up maybe twice. I think they visit it once, but they maybe visit it twice. It has to be twice, right? Maybe. So my general notes for this is there is nothing remotely likable or interesting about the main character named Ropa. She is rude, a brat, mean, unnecessarily cruel, and the book constantly rewards her despite this. The book also tells her how great of a person she is, despite her obviously being not a great person. It's like the author thinks that making her strong and brave. It's like the author thinks he's making her strong and brave, but he's actually making her a jerk. There is no setting to this. Like, it's set in Scotland, but there are virtually no Scottish characters but the criminals, like I said. No Scottish setting, but random street names mentioned every now and then, and it's constantly referencing Americanisms and American culture. It really doesn't reference Scottish culture, Scottish lore, Scottish history, really any of that. There are a couple of arses and we's set throughout, but that does not make up for the number of American words, cultures, and references used to make this book that is not Scotland at all. Now, I don't know what made this decision. The author of this book is actually from Zimbabwe and says that he lives in Scotland now, but part of me wonders if this book was actually set in a different location, and then when the publisher picked it up, they were like, well, you need to change this location because people aren't going to be interested in that because this author is better known that his other books are all Afrofuturism or set in Zimbabwe. And so then now he's in a Scottish place, but all that it feels like is that maybe he wrote it in a different place, and then they were like, well, pick a European country or something, and then change a couple of street names, and then describe this thing instead, and then call it good. But it doesn't feel Scottish at all. And then it's even weirder when it's full of Americanisms instead of anything else. So that feels like what happened. But obviously I'm just supposing. I'm telling you the feelings that I got from what I was reading it. For it being called Library of the Dead, more time was spent being held captive in a living building than actually inside of the library. The library wasn't used for any major plot, anything. They even met some people in the library that didn't really matter. The whole meetings in that room actually didn't matter, even though she meets the villain in that room, in the Library of the Dead. It makes no difference. The scene makes literally no difference to anything. So the title felt like a complete lie, and I felt lied to, and I felt cheated as the reader. More than halfway through the book, and more than halfway through the book, and the book is also barely even about ghosts. It's so many random side quests and sub-stories and things that have nothing to do with anything. Ropa and her sister are also both written as the most and specialist people of all specials. Like, the sister is brought up as, oh yeah, she is so smart in class. She is too smart in class. You should probably think about sending her to this special school. And that is just mentioned and completely dropped after that because you can't do anything with it. And also, despite Ropa living with her grandma is apparently completely useless, and so Ropa is the one acting as the parent, going to the parent-teacher meetings for her sister, and acting as a parent despite being like a 14 or 15-year-old who dropped out of school. Like, I don't understand how any of this works, and why her grandmother is so useless. Did I also already mention that the long tangents it goes on were constant and longer than the main story of the book? This felt like something the author just wrote and never went back to check a second time, ranted, and somehow it got 2 awards. One of them is from the ALA. Yeah, I'm not suspicious of you at all, ALA, I swear. It was so careless in chapter, story, pacing, and everything. There were times when I was reading it and I'm like, I feel like the author is having writer's block and is just bored and writing whatever comes to mind. Oh, he was listening to this podcast. He's going to talk about this podcast now. and the agent didn't look over it, an editor didn't look over it, he didn't look over it. They were like, just make sure there are no copy errors, and then hit publish. There's no world building in this. It barely does world building, but you know, that's gonna stick when there are hardly any ghosts in it. Everything is solved for the main character in the end, and then random choices for the plot happened when the author got bored. It's like the author came up with an idea for the title and then had no idea how to actually execute the title, so it turned to random podcasts and pyromancy tangents. Also, like, it's set in some futuristic space where Europe has fallen, and it's in like some dystopia version of the UK, of Scotland, but then it's referencing a lot of things that are like right now culture or culture from the 70s and 80s. And it's like, if Europe has fallen, how far into the future are we, and how do they still have these references, and how are these included in the current pop culture that Ropa has when she's living in a caravan on a property because downtown Edinburgh is like destroyed? So that goes with the world building, or the lack thereof, is we have no idea how any of this works. Who would I suggest Library of the Dead for? It's a novel that vaguely uses ghosts, has a really sassy, immature main character who is supposed to be in Scotland, but you have more references to American culture vernacular than the, and saying stuff like in the mo. An MC who is very selfish in every single way and is just annoying, and really no showtime for the Library of the Dead itself. It's the start of a trilogy in a series, so maybe any of that changes in the future, but it is suggested for people who maybe want kind of ghosts, not really ghosts, kind of have a really sassy main character, but you don't really want anything to make sense, and you hate setting. If you hate setting, this story is allergic to it. Second book that I read over the last couple of months was called Blood and Body by Michael Gallagher. I would describe the genres as horror, specifically Catholic horror, supernatural mystery, action, and superhero. It's not really a superhero, but the way that the beats work and the way that the main character works, it is much more superhero. The summary is Pastor Keenan wakes up to some people breaking into his church. He assumes as a robbery, but there are ghouls and a younger member of the church named Stephen who has led them in. This is the intro to our two leads, Pastor James Keenan and Nakano, and this book will test their faith and resolve as they track the supernatural/demonic beings that are influencing their city and causing murder, mayhem, and destruction. My thoughts on this book include it immediately jumps into action, and it is very much an action-based story if you think like a religious superhero, as it doesn't appear to be character-driven in any sort of way. The characters are the characters that are the main characters of Keenan and Nakano are already pretty strong in what they're doing. Their flaws do not change the direction of the story. It is more they are the heroes of their area, solving the mystery. The biggest issue that I saw throughout the story is that the priests fighting the demons questioned if their faith would be strong enough to defeat the demons, which is pretty common in religious fiction. Even in Faith, the unholy trinity, that was the thing. The setting is also one of the stronger parts of this book. It takes its time to describe the different areas of the city, more so than the dystopian elements of the story. Now, it did get preachy at times, which might be expected from a priest's perspective, but it definitely ended up feeling to me as a non-Catholic as Catholic fiction over fiction written by a Catholic about a priest. The narration of this book in particular seemed judgy of women, young people, and non-believers. Everyone outside of the church in particular is treated as a loser, super angry, described as ugly, and extremely unhappy. They often get punished. This, in part, makes the target audience very confusing, because if it's judging outsiders so hard, which I understand from the perspective of Catholics, I have been judged by Catholics a number of times. But if you're going to be judging every non-believer, every woman as being defiant that needs a man to be subordinate to and to tell them what to do because women can't make decisions, and how young people are so stupid they need all of the adults to tell them what to do as well. If you fall into any of those categories, you may have a harder time reading this, because frankly it gets annoying to read such a black and white perspective in Catholic fiction, where you're either Catholic and you're correct, or you're non-Catholic and you're wrong and you're going to be punished. As a further example of this, later in the book is a girl named Lucia, who is later introduced with her abuela telling her that she needs to go to church and pray that God sends her a good man because she can't pick one for herself and she keeps getting into trouble. Her entire character is set up as being a young, faithless woman going on her own way and screwing her life up because she's young, female, not embracing the tenets of Catholicism, and she has an absent father. We are just introduced to these facts right before she is captured by a demon man who is feeding off her, and she's not sure if she will live through it. She's left alone in the room that she is being held captive in, and she seeks out the Bible, finding it in a drawer, and then finding a laminated placard in it with the words to pray to Mary to save her. So that kind of goes back to, if you're on the outside, you're non-Catholic, you're a woman making decisions, you're going to be punished until a man comes and saves you, or you evoke God, or both. In this case, it's both. Because she prays to God and then her father comes and saves her. Quote, "There were few people in the city that knew suffering like its resident sex workers. It was a profession, if one could call it that never failed to corrode anything and everyone that came into contact with it. It started out with a transactionalization of something holy and beautiful, and so cheapened it. Its nature preyed on desperate people who are lied to and told that their full worth is tied to their physicalities. It is a unique form of abuse that destroys everyone involved, mind, body, and soul. The givers, the takers, the consumers. Addiction is widespread, rape common. It is hell on earth, dotted across the landscape, taking up the space of one mattress, one couch, one car seat at a time." So I really liked this is a perspective from the priest. Made a lot of sense. And I really like the perspective of showing the leadership and showing the characters' faith and the character's beliefs and morale. That makes entire sense. But then describing every single character as faithless and ugly and horrible if they're on the outside, instead of showing them any sort of grace, is where it starts coming in as feeling more preachy and judgmental. Because the narrative style that you do things is going to influence the way that your readers interact or perceive what it is that you've written. So maybe your characters are religious, and so it makes total sense for them to act in a certain way. Once you pull out of that and you look at how the characters are treated, what is being rewarded, what is being punished, that will tell the readers something about the morality of the themes in the book. In the same way that if you look at Akatar, the character Feyre constantly calls herself a victim, demonizes other people, and constantly gets whatever she wants. So that tells you that the book is on her side and wants you to see her as a victim as well and to cheer for her to win. But I'm looking at her actions, and that's not actually what she is. The same way the Lawn Boy is. He's going to complain about how unfair the world is, and then I'm going to watch his actions and be like, no, bro, you're a pretentious prick and kind of lazy. Anyway, there are a lot of people in here described as appearing older than they are. It's something that I noticed enough to apparently write it down, like 20 or 30 years older than they are. The women working at the church also appeared to be spinsters that nobody wanted, and the narrator still judged them for that, which was kind of weird. It's like every female in this was a loser of some kind, was alone some kind. Even the women in the church were just there. They were the leftovers that nobody wanted. And even if they were faithful women to the church, they were still the people that nobody wanted, and the narration judged them. Sometimes explanations just felt out of place and long. There was a chapter that started by talking about how people are corrupted and let demons in, some history of possession. Then it's not actually active in the story, so it ends up feeling vaguely related by means of Catholicism. It wasn't really part of the story that it was written into, but then like maybe came in later because of possession in the story. And while it's an interesting perspective, I didn't see the point of entering that information in through narrative voiceover when it didn't have anything to do with what was going on. It was just expositing at the beginning of a chapter as a dismembered monologue that didn't build into the story that was being told at that time. The further in I went, the more these blurbs started to feel like they were making arguments in order to inform the reader rather than being about the books or the characters. Quote, In short, people wanted what they wanted when they wanted it and would be happy to burn down the Garden of Eden to get it, and not for the knowledge of good and evil. A carton of cigarettes and a session with a psychic for a week's winning lottery number is all it would take. It was a time of technological wonder and human horror. It was the same story that was being told since the fall. They were teenagers, eager to shun the protections and wisdoms of loving parent, convinced they knew better, even as their own proclaimed wisdom sunk everything around them into ruins. The same humanity that had forsaken God as an unneeded, stifling superstition, whose mysterious nature was proof of his non-existence, had paradoxically turned to the sweeter, more nebulous promises of psychic readings, tarot cards, and astrology, whose mysterious nature was somehow proof of their existence to guide them. It was the gates of hell raging in a war that was already over and lost, but it didn't mean the enemy wouldn't take everyone they possibly could along with the way. But God arms his soldiers. So part of this book also felt like it was making a theological and historical arguments to inform people, but it's weird, and that's also one of the things that made me confused about who the target audience was. That if they were already Catholic, then it felt like a lot of them may already be aware of some of these things, though I know that there is a difference between the scholars of Catholicism and like the regular practitioners of Catholicism. However, the judgmental tone of the book makes it feel like it would be a turnoff to potential readers who are not already Catholic and not familiar with the background of Catholicism. One of the things this relates to was presenting the details of arguments within the Catholic Church and where there's disagreement on literalness of the text, and where the church kind of split, where there were disagreements. And so that feels like something that people in the church would already know. But if you're not a Catholic, then you're not necessarily going to care. But also you may be interested in that, but you're going to be less interested if you feel judged by the book by not being a Catholic. You know what I mean? A personal pet peeve of mine also came up in this book. I always hate it, and I get pulled out of a book when it happens. And that's when it feels like parts of the book are ripped straight off of internet rant websites if it has nothing to do with the story or what is happening. In this case, one of the instances of me just being ripped out for internet jargon was talking about how internet punditry has turned a lot of people off from listening to the, quote, fake news. There are ways to fit this sort of thing into the story easily, but then there is inserting it in there where it doesn't belong and breaking the narrative focus in order to opine. And that's what this felt like in this story, since the priests really aren't media obsessed and it doesn't come into the story all that often, and it's using very specific language that did not feel like it fit with the setting. There's also a lot of action in here where sometimes it may feel random and lead to random things spurred on by other things, such as Keenan seeing something that then leads to another thing where he then goes to the next thing, where he then goes to the next thing, and it's not really necessarily he's discovering things. But I think that was one of the issues that I also had with the one book I DNF'd earlier last year, whenever that was, because it was just like it was a noir with aliens where the character just showed up, was told where to go next, showed up, told where to go next, showed up, told where to go next, and I was just like, oh my gosh. There was also some awkward head hopping in the narration that was just there to explain things, but it made it hard to keep the character voice consistent. And sometimes it just did it so that you would see how bad certain people were or how good certain people were. And it just is a common issue with first books. I know I had a hard time getting rid of every time I head hopped in Dead End Drive. It just sort of happens. Quote, Hot Rod sat carefully considering the new developments. His gang was made up almost entirely of men raised by mothers and grandmothers. They were usually the only women who meant anything in their lives. Hot Rod and the other older guys up the ranks were surrogate fathers to many of them, for better or worse. They were mostly protectors, there to show them what their young charges were capable of, give them a sense of purpose to them, to show them the worth of the fractured virtues they all lived by. One of the highest ones was loyalty. You never went against your own and never snitched. The highest one was that you didn't hurt women. You may not have respected them, but you didn't lay your hand on them unless that bitch was crazy and you had no choice. You hit one of the gang's women, especially one that wasn't yours, you paid in blood. You put your hands on a kid in any way, you paid with your life. There were no exceptions. So this is more of a gritty thing. It has Priest Keenan goes and is friends with gang members as he's hunting stuff down. You got the demons, and you've got a lot of action. So if you are in the mood for action, for Catholic horror, and especially for religious writers who put their religion up front in the story, a father saving a daughter from a demon story and a fast-paced plot, this would be the story for you. Another story that I read was Den of Sparrows by H.H. Miller. It is the second book in her Idon series. She is also an author here on YouTube at Halo Moon Studios. And the genres for this book I would describe as YA, coming of age, survival / slice of life, dystopian adventure, and it is very anime flavored. The swearing in this book actually feels very Japanese to me. It's not kso, it is ksa, but I can tell that it's supposed to be damn it. So, based on the context, but it is very Japanese feeling, which also makes sense when the author lived in Japan for a certain amount of time and also has done comics. So that feeling, that vibe comes into the story. This book is a continuation from the first book where it still follows Sparrow and Rome. It does still have the two perspectives of Rome and Sparrow, the main brother and sister from the first book, and they are still separated. It opens with Rome hunting with his dogs and talking about his dog breeding and making pups. It then goes over to Sparrow, where she is helping Jenny learn how to walk again and recover from the events of the previous book. I'm not sure. The plot takes some time to get started, as like I said, it is very slice of life. It is slow moving. It is very... Sparrow is getting to know the politics of the place that she is living in, while Rome is trying to kind of set up a base, set up a home, and work with the local politics of the boys there. And there's a power struggle among the boys. He's also trying to take care of his basically foster mom, stepmom, the woman that raised him, and Sparrow, and trying to bring unity to that. He's also trying to find a way to get back to his sister and trying to find out how to control his newly awakening abilities. So you've got all of these little things going on, but there is no actual like driving action of characters trying to accomplish something or get a goal. It is just slowly moving together, slowly moving forward in time. And Sparrow also ends up dealing with how Jenny is recovering and Jenny is becoming more independent, and how her position, Sparrow's position as Jenny's assistant is changing because Jenny's needs are changing, and Sparrow is wanting to become more independent and take on her role. And so then she is meeting people like Crow and others and starting to see the problems that are in Idun and trying to figure out what she can do to correct them or to make it better or to get out from the situation and get back to her brother, because that's really where she wants to be. So if you're looking for more of a slice of life, more of a slow-paced thing that is very much, it's a pretty adventure-y anime style where you kind of got the hanging out, something happens eventually, more hanging out, slow developments. And as you get closer to the middle of the book, it starts picking up more with the mystery that is going on. And then the end of the book picks up a lot more with the action as the mystery from the center starts picking up. But it does take time to get it started. It continues with the vibe of the first book, where it's more about Rome finding his way and place in life as an adult, and Sparrow finding her way among the politics. There is a bit of symbolism in the stone turning to steel, the metal for him, and him having to harden up to become a man and to protect his tribe, versus him being soft as a young boy, as a teenager. And then that, his metal coating having to get hard on the outside to fight for what he wants, to fight the people that oppose him. I'm also sure that there is something similar with Sparrow. When her abilities start coming up, she does start realizing that she's got an ability, and she has a necklace that is blocking these abilities that were also blocking things from Jenny. And so then that comes in, she meets a goddess, and you've got some gender politics going in there as well that come up. There are some telling things in the language styling of this book, such as she said, eager to change the subject. There is actually quite a bit in the narration where it ends up pausing it to tell you what is being meant or what is being done, when you can already infer that from the actions, which is one of the things that does end up making this feel more YA, which that isn't a problem. It just obviously is a YA book that is a bit more straightforward in certain times and is more telly in certain ways. But it is a clean YA. This is what I would actually say reads like a true YA for me, where it may be much more pleasing to somebody in that middle section, 13, 15, 16, that wants something clean, that wants something adventure-y. There's no sex in it. But in some cases, it is a more mature YA, not because of subject matter, not because of scenes, but because of some of the subject matter that is dealt with, like there is bringing a baby into the world and the maturity and becoming, it's really that transitional period of going from like 18 to 19, 20, 21 and finding how you are a young man or a young woman as opposed to a teenager. So And so this book said to me more of that transitional period and did deal with interactions of building a homestead, dealing with your peers, competing with your peers, and who is the boss, and how you fit in, and how to run a house, or how to be a wife. Nobody specifically is made into a wife in this, but it does deal more with that thing, which is what makes it feel more mature, because it's not in the like high school setting, if you know what I mean. So I would suggest this book for readers who want an adventure or survivalist story. Oh yeah, at times it also made me think of Minecraft, where there is stuff going on around you, but at least on Rome's side, it is mostly base related with lots of dogs, and Sparrow's side leans more into the politics. And if you want a story that is about a pair of siblings growing up, finding their place, and then coming back together, having powers, then this would be good for you. There is no smut, there is no sexual content, and the swearing is, I think it's pretty much ksa. I think that's it. Another book that I read recently was Let There Be Fire by R.A. Morley. I would describe this genre as action or adventure, a soft fantasy, kind of sophomoric, and some mild anime vibes. The summary would be, the story opens with the main character, Cal, in jail where he meets a man named Avi. Cal is a pirate and a dark elf and says that he is in jail for flirting with a woman, i.e. read that as harassment. He was harassing a lady guard, that's for sure. Avi, a half-elf, says that he's there being framed for the murder of a guard. After the two of them escape, Cal insists that his nature of self-sacrifice that he inherited from his father is causing him to pity Avi because a man 10 years ago took his wife and son, and Cal is now going to help Avi look for the big bad guy to kill him for hunting down women and children, because Cal cannot let that stand. That is really what his motivation is, oh, my dad was like this, I inherited this from my dad, suddenly I'm going to feel bad for you and sacrifice my current life to go and do this for you. This leads to a lot of shenanigans, moving around through the world, getting on a boat, meeting with gods who want him. A lot of people want to have sex with Cal. Let's be clear about that. And Cal also wants to have sex with anything that will have sex with him. And even some that don't want to have sex with him, let's be real. So some of the things that I got from this book, I really didn't understand where Cal's motivation came from when he was arrested for flirting with a woman guard, but immediately he just launched into, like, he switched. We got a bit of a character whiplash at the very beginning, because he comes off as kind of sleazy, selfish, living in the moment, like a YOLO, like, I'm gonna get what I want, do what I want. And then we suddenly get out of that and he's like, I have morals and I want to take care of women and children. And we don't really get to see that side of him before he randomly decides that he's going to throw his life into turmoil. I think it would have actually been more helpful for him if we saw him arriving in the town and he did something nice, and then he got distracted and flirted with somebody and got a little pushy, and then he got into this other thing, because then we would have seen that soft before he was rough, and then the soft. But instead, we get our first introduction to him is he's a sleazebag. So then it's like, well, why is he suddenly like, I will turn my entire life upside down just to help you, because I have morals that aren't even my morals, they're my dad's morals. So that was weird. The narration felt kind of clippy to me. It felt like, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. It felt like fan fiction writing, in that it didn't really spend a whole lot of time developing the scenes or the characters or the setting. It was written in a way that it kind of assumed you should already know the style of characters and the style of creatures and the style of settings. And maybe that's normal for fantasy, which is why I say it was like soft fantasy, because it doesn't describe anything. It doesn't describe the settings too much. It doesn't describe the magic really at all. It's just kind of is there, and even the characters' descriptions are very minimal. The humor and dialogue felt kind of awkward and sometimes very immature. The swearing felt off for me for how modern some of the dialogue felt, and it didn't really read like a fantasy novel of elves and the rest to me, and that ended up breaking immersion. It's written in what might be considered millennial language, which the characters all talk the same, almost the same as talking like a modern millennial, and it's kind of disrupting to the setting, again, because there is no setting. Every time the book swore, it pulled me out of the story. Things like, how do you expect Kitty to get up there with a big fuck-off axe? Was just the constant usage of swearing. And I don't have a problem with swearing. Obviously, Joey swears a lot, and I have passes through Bodymore just to get rid of swearing so she doesn't swear as much. But it has to fit with the setting and feel like it fits with the characters. And for this, it didn't do it, because I didn't feel like I had a good sense of the characters. Like, when you have people talking like they are modern day people in jail, and swearing as much as they do. I don't know about anybody else. Let me know if you are a fantasy reader, because I'm not a very common fantasy reader. But for me, if I'm reading more modern language, like I would find in Baltimore, inside of this fantasy novel with dark elves and black elves and half elves and dwarves and giants and orcs and snake people, if they start talking with a modern slang and means of speaking, it takes me out of it. But again, I don't read that much fantasy, so I don't know how common this is in fantasy. If that's not something that bothers you, or you actually like the more modern dialogue in stories, then this might be for you. Cal is also just not somebody that I could personally like, which made the story harder to follow. His arrogance was immature. His response to everything being, well, I'm so freaking hot, everybody wants to have sex with me, and, well, I've got two plans. I can light them on fire, or I can have sex. Like, that was everything that he said. He also often felt self-righteous. On top of that, he turned me off pretty immediately when he said, I want my woman to bear my children and fight my battles for me. I mean, that's gonna be a personal thing, because, I personally don't really like when people shove off their responsibilities on somebody else, but other people may be completely charmed by that type of personality. I completely state that that is just not a kind of character that I really like. But that is such a way to start a story for me where I'm not going to have respect or affection for this character, because that is like one of the first things that he says, and he didn't ingratiate himself to me first and then immediately goes and does something that I don't like. And I didn't really understand the idea of not believing in gods, which did come up. Hal said he wasn't religious because he didn't believe in gods. Well, he was literally talking to a god. Now, I could understand him saying, well, I don't want to worship this god. I don't believe in worshiping this god. But in saying I don't believe in gods while talking to a god, I didn't really understand that choice. On more of the topic with the immature humor, it is also stuff that's like, how old are you? 69, LMFAO, that's the naughty number. So you constantly have stuff like that going on in the dialogue and in the way that Cal behaves. And so it's constantly making immature jokes, being kind of stupid, and calling the villain the wrong name on purpose just because. Now, if you've read any of my work, you also probably know that I love atmosphere. I love setting. I love making setting into a character. And so when this book doesn't spend any time creating atmosphere, location, or character, it's just quickly moving. If you don't like atmosphere or setting very much, then this book may be for you, because it pretty much drops the character in location, gets stuff going on, people talk, and then it moves on. This can sometimes result in talking head syndrome, which happens quite frequently, where the dialogue just goes back and forth without saying who is saying what for long periods of time. And at times that actually made me a little bit confused, but if that is your preference, that may be in there. On top of the not building atmosphere or setting, there are also times when the narrative descriptions reads phrases like, a bit more banter went on, though once awake and pained enough by harsh sunlight, Cal got himself out of bed and dressed. So that ends up feeling like it was a placeholder, but this is all based on how I write stories and read stories too. So if it kind of just summarizes something or says, hey, a little bit more stuff happened and then we moved on, it ends up feeling like it wasn't developed, like the author just kind of skipped through the section to get on to the next thing, and it's undeveloped blocking in a scene. And if you don't know what blocking is, in this case, with the way that I describe it, or the way that I'm describing it, it's the movements that a character makes when they're on the stage of a play. And so when I'm talking about it in a book, it's like, okay, as an author, I know that I want characters to be in the scene doing something, but I'm not sure what I want them to do yet. So I'm just going to say the characters are here, and then I will revise the scene, come back later, and fill this information out more. So that's what undeveloped blocking feels like to me. Another example of was the phrase, he flirted in Elvish, instead of actually writing the interaction out. He said he approached these people, he flirted in Elvish, and then the scene moved on. So you didn't actually get to spend time with these characters. Cal also seems all-powerful and able to resolve any plot issue on a dime if he wants to, but he just doesn't do it immediately, because he's got phrases like, you mean that you could have done this the whole time? Multiple times throughout the story, when he suddenly resolves the issue that they're having, but they were struggling, and then he uses his all-powerful modes to get to the end of it, meaning it puts us in scenes that could have been resolved, puts people in danger that could have been kept out of danger, just for it to be cleared up immediately for no reason other than for the book to kind of turn it into a joke. Because the scenes are so clippy, they go through them so fast, and there is a lack of description, both in action and atmosphere, then there ends up being no tension or very little tension, because it introduces what would cause tension in a scene and then kind of skips through it in the narration because there is no setting, and it just goes, well, things are uncomfortable, but they got over that and moved on. Whereas you could actually have two people standing in silence with body language that expresses that discomfort that does not get resolved. Now, if you like OP characters, which Cal, at least from book 1, reads like an OP character. If you like the OP characters, if you like the arrogant characters, the super cocky characters, again, this sort of reads like an anime without fully understanding the archetype or without fully investing in creating the juxtaposition of he's got a really, really soft heart, but he hides it behind being this cocky thing because he's kind of hurt. Or he's this hero that kind of is a slime ball, but is working on actually being a hero in the right moments. Like, I love Vash Stampede from the original Trigun, because he's got the heart and he's got the silly. But I didn't feel like this story established Cal as having those serious moments before giving us the other thing, and then mostly he just becomes a joke. He's overly cocky in an immature way, hitting on literally everyone and everything, and feeling like he is the hottest shit out there. Everybody wants to sleep with him. He wants to sleep with everyone, and he is sure that even if you say no to him, you still want to sleep with him. He is sure of it. And that is just not the kind of character that I like. But that may tickle the pickle of quite a many of you. I mean, we got stuff like where he's talking to one of the goddesses, and he's like, quote, "While talking to the goddess, it's not about wanting you, it's about having something that I want." Cal paused to consider. Raw sexuality? How many times did anyone get to say something cheeky to a god? She laughed and shook her head, silver ribbons of hair flowing weightlessly in every direction. I like you, but don't push it. So, again, that turns into the character thing where the all-powerful characters that could, like, wipe the floor with you are just giving you a bunch of grace for what appears to be no reason or very little reason, and then there's no consequences for anything. He also then paused to argue with the goddess that he's an equal in power and she doesn't have any power over him, which kind of neuters any and all gods. So, like, what is the point of having a god if the mortals or the elves are just as powerful as the gods? There's no respect for hierarchy. There's no respect for different power levels. And so that, again, ends up failing in the world building department for me and taking away from the stakes. There's also, really bizarrely, a lot of, like, random hanging out, reading smut novels, like, in various places. He's in jail reading smut. He's asking the guards to bring him smut. He goes to this old lady's house and he sees that the only books on her bookshelf, or the books that he notices and recognizes, are smut. And then you later learn one of the people that joins his parties is a smut writer. And he's also, when he's in jail and looking at the smut books, he's like, oh, based on these descriptions of these smut novels, it has to be written by a man because a woman would never write like this. And then he later discovers a woman wrote the smut novels, and he's inwardly thinking, you go, girl. And it's just, it might be because I'm coming off of the back of reading all of these ALA books, but I don't know why smut is the quirky feature that people add to characters. So it was just like, why? In all of this other stuff. Anyway, the suggested readers for this, I would say anybody who wants to read a light fantasy world that doesn't have a whole lot of description bogging it down because you want to read something fast-paced, you want to read something maybe like a quick D&D session with the creatures, a protagonist who thinks he's funny and sexy and sleeps around a lot, is bisexual, and is a fast read. I would put this on that list. The last book that I will talk about today was Cripple Squadron by Fred Hughes. This book came into the Discord, because of somebody's suggestion based on the title, and I gotta say, it was a disappointment. It was such a disappointment. So the genres are military, soft sci-fi with lots and lots of space battle descriptions. The majority of it is space battle descriptions in, like, space flight. And the summary would be, Vicky Buckner is a pilot for the U.S. military with a special chip in her head to allow her to control planes with her mind. She is the only one like this. Then, after a test flight goes wrong, she ends up losing both her legs, her arm, and damaging her innards. The scientists in charge feel bad for the test that went wrong and want to give her new technology prosthetics that she can also control with her mind. Not only that, but it's important not to let Vicky go because she is the most capable member of the entire United States military and the only way that they can fight China in what is World War III. So this book, oh my gosh, this book was incredibly boring. Like, you would think Cripple Squadron, we're starting out by getting rid of all of her body parts. It's going to be at least some, and written by a boomer, a retired boomer. It's going to be something. No, it's not. It likes to mention that Vicky is smelly. That's about it. Every time Vicky is on the screen, it's smelly, but Vicky is described as the main character of this book, but she is not actually in the majority of the book. The book changes perspective. After she gets into the accident at the very beginning, she's actually in a coma for a couple of, like, 3 chapters, and then she comes out of it, and she's like, oh no, I'm missing body parts, and they're like, it's okay, we'll teach you, we'll help you with this, and then she gets the prosthetics, and so she never actually suffers having been crippled, but she still calls herself a cripple, and she immediately is just good with her new prosthetics because it skips her learning how to use any of them, and she's just good at them. It goes to the Chinese perspective. It goes to the perspective of her father, who is also her immediate commander. It goes to her boyfriend, who is also a commander of her squadron, who asks her to marry him. And, yeah, 50% into this book, and there is still no Cripple Squadron involved. And you're like, that's the title of the book. How are they not here by halfway through the book? Are you really? The battle scenes are super long, and there was even one. So she got into the accident, she went into a coma, and then we get a whole chapter that is just her in a dream fighting in a fighter jet, and it is a very long chapter of a battle in a dream. So you're reading it, and you know it's not going to matter. Whether she wins or loses, it's not going to matter because it's not real. And it is so unbelievably long. There are too many people who have, oh my gosh. And so not only that, I have a little bit of a rant to make here. And if this calls you out, I am sorry, because this is not everybody. I also chose to finally just publish in 2020, and it wasn't because of COVID. It was because I gave up after going to a writing conference in 2019, and I was like, I am disillusioned. All of this stuff, I'm disillusioned now after talking to agents again. way to kill the traditional drive is by talking to agents again and being like, yeah, this is how things are. Anyway, there were a lot of people that started writing and publishing specifically in 2020 because of COVID, because they got locked down, and then they started seeing writing a book as gig work. Not because they like the art form, not because they respect the art form, not because they respect readers or the stories, as it just became gig work, like writing blog posts. And if that's you, whatever. But I feel like my time is wasted, and I especially feel like I need to critique you if you're on your 7th book and it opens up with a prologue that is actually a preface. Learn the words. You're 7 books in, and you could not even be bothered to learn the correct language terminology for your literature. It is utterly disgraceful, and I judge you for this. I know that there are different levels of entering into the creative space, and you have to learn somewhere. But when you're selling books, it's something different. And if I have to read your book, and you cannot even get the bare minimalist of a language correct, with a prologue versus a preface versus an introduction on your 7th book, I'm coming for you. Never trust a retiree boomer with too much money from working in the army and from a 401k and boredom. It's just, they got the money to pay for the marketing. You had the book unable to decide how it wanted to present information, so you had some thoughts that were in quotation marks, some thoughts that were in italics, thoughts that were in first person in the middle of a third person paragraph without any indication at all as to what was going on. You had quotes like, she took a deep breath, trying to center herself and almost gagged. God, I stink. Body odor, alcohol, and sex seemed to ooze out of every pore of her body. Vicky looked at the passed out body lying next to her. Damn, I was really out of it by the time that we got to this room. I don't even remember if I enjoyed it. Vicky chuckled to herself. It's the story of my life. Bad decisions. There were also shortcuts in this that were not good. Descriptions that relied on pop culture references, like, quote, the ring rotated around the central core, generating a limited amount of gravity. Any reader of the 1970s and 1980s science fiction would recognize the design. It switches perspective a lot to all sides of the war, which made it very hard to know who the main character was, even though it was Cripple Squad, so you'd think that it was Vicky, but it really didn't matter. She was, for the most part, when you get to the like climactic main battle near the end of the book, Vicky is not involved at all. She like comes in at the very end after like a 30-40 page fight scene. I don't even know if it was actually that long, but it was a very long fight scene that just went between the Chinese battlers and other people that worked for the US military and her dad. And that's it. Personally, I felt like this story was false advertising. Despite being called Cripple Squadron, there was literally no focus on the character being an amputee. It wasn't used at all. She just got exploded, robot parts, it's over. Vicky is barely even without her limbs. She actually has very few scenes in this book, period. So end of the day, who is this for? People that want military pilot fiction written by a boomer with boomer money and deciding to publish in 2020. And you like space battles. But the world building might destroy you if you're annoyed. So that's that. But that was a handful of books that I've read in the last month or so for you to check out if you want them. Stay tuned for more and let me know if you like this type of review as opposed to the other type. Not that one is going away, but I'm gonna try to play around a little bit and see what works. If any of them interest you to any extent and what you want to see them for yourself, I highly recommend you check them out. I think all of them are indie. No, all of them but Library of the Dead are indie, and varying degrees. Very, very different books. If you were to check one out, which one would you most likely be to check out? Let me know in the comments down below. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer.
For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die.
Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?